hedonism. And I would say that that's the default state that characterizes human immaturity. That possession by implicit, fragmented whim.
Loopholes in liberalism have been found and easily exploited. We have been hacked. Rule of law is what built so much of the West. It is in the corruption of the rule of law itself that we see where the problems begin.
Must be transcended by a more sophisticated uniting principle. I'm curious about the overlap, or the lack of overlap, I suppose, in the principles that we've been promoting. I've been thinking, for example, some of the success of the convention so far and of our organization has been, well, the positive vision element of what we're promoting. And I guess that's where I'd like to go with you. Yesterday we had a very interesting panel on energy, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot, energy and the environment. Scott Tinker in particular has outlined a vision of the future, and it's not a net zero vision, I can tell you that. It's a vision where we cooperate to do everything we possibly can to drive energy prices down as low as they can possibly be, using everything at our disposal, right? Nuclear, coal, gas, oil, solar, wind, whatever can compete, because the most effective way of enriching the absolutely poor and likely of serving long-term environmental needs is to make people wealthy, so they can afford to care about the future, especially in the developing world. And so I'm kind of wondering, you have an opportunity now, because the right is split in the UK, to really hash things out on the conservative side. And this sort of thing happened a bit in Canada. And that means that it's possible now for conservatives to push the envelope. And I'm really curious about your view on, it isn't exactly even on net zero, which I think is an appalling policy, to get that right out on the table. But more than that, it's like, how appalling is it?
Good morning, everybody.
I've personally spoken to teachers in British state schools who've acknowledged that classroom tech has hampered the progress of many of their pupils, and the huge boom in tutoring among private school children points to the fact that they're not learning well in school either. So why are we getting so overexcited about EdTech here in Britain? Why are we outsourcing executive function skills to a computer? Why are we allowing exam boards to take every subject online by 2030? All the emerging research should generate a pulling up of the drawbridge rather than the open-armed embrace that we're seeing. There's currently talk of AI being pumped into our classrooms, with children's data being harvested to better improve the AI. Why?
When I returned to the UK recently, I discovered that the great debate in the UK was about how to kill the elderly more efficiently. And I was struck that the only argument that any Labour minister could make against euthanasia coming online with the NHS was that she didn't think that the NHS was capable of performing euthanasia efficiently. I mentioned in The Spectator at the time that this was, I think, wrong in one important degree. The NHS is a world leader in killing the elderly. It's just that they only kill the people who don't want to die. The NHS, to which endless governments in this country pour money, is always told to us to be the envy of the world, and yet, of course, none of us can find a GP appointment.
The Conservative Party in Britain has just lost an election. We have a crisis, just like the West. People ask me what difference new leadership will make. Well, take a look at President Trump. He's shown that sometimes you need that first stint in government to spot the problems, but it's the second time around when you really know how to fix them.
Hedonistic pleasure seeking, the gratification of immediate desire, the simple avoidance of pain or displeasure is not a principle that can improve when it's implemented or unite people in productive cooperation and competition so that a society can be established.
Those may not be perfect, but according to one report, USAID gave $3 million to a rapper in Gaza who makes anti-Semitic songs. Now, whatever your politics, we can all agree that's a waste of taxpayers' money. Kanye West would have done it for free. Now, thanks to the end of censorship on Twitter, we finally have the ability to express reasonable and widely held views. Because of this, other social media companies are now fearful of being too aggressive in their censorship too. Now, it's true, we haven't yet won the argument on freedom of speech here in Europe. I thought the most hilarious example of this was last week, when J.D. Vance gave a speech in Munich in which he criticized European leaders for trying to shut down speech that they don't like. The reaction? A German politician stood up and went, "This is unacceptable!"
The dominance of the personality by local, narrow, and self-serving whim is not a...
The one thing that drives me absolutely potty is when I hear that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. That's what they tell us. That clearly is absolutely nuts. Now, there are times in our past when CO2 in the atmosphere has been much, much higher than it is today, and that's before people drove 4x4 Chelsea tractors. And I remember having this debate about 20 years ago. There was a man called Sir Patrick Moore.
Yes.
Very famous scientist, The Sky at Night, great character, very respected man. And I said to him about 20 years ago, I said, Patrick, what do you think about man's impact on the environment through CO2? He said, well, it's impossible to think man doesn't have some sort of impact. He said, but when it comes to carbon dioxide levels and when it comes to warming and cooling, he said, let me assure you that sunspot activity and underwater volcanic activity will always have a bigger impact on the environment than man himself ever can, and I very much stuck to that view. So I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you whether CO2 is leading to warming or not, but there are so many other massive factors.
Our country is not racist. We don't need to apologize. We don't need to pay reparations or give away the Chagos Islands. Free speech matters. Some cultures are better than others, and it's only contentious to say this because honesty has become impossible. People should not be afraid to speak out. We will be proud of our country.
Playable or noble game, and it allies itself necessarily with the force that cynics, like the postmodernists, like the neo-Marxists, believe is the only viable uniting force, that of power. If you're motivated by nothing but the pursuit of your own subjective desire in the moment, or your desire to avoid the necessary pain that mature conduct involves, you have to turn to power to impose your narrow will on others, because if you're dominated by the immature longing for your immediate self-gratification, then it's all about you in the narrowest sense, and the only option you have in terms of your relationship with others is to turn to the force and compulsion that make them involuntary servants of your will.